Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Andia. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics and something I am in a lifelong journey of learning more about and also addressing in my own life, and that is fear. So, we are going to take it to a quantum level today. So, one of the first things that I always like to share about fear is that we're actually only born with two fears, innate fears. I think this research is out of 10, but you can Google it. It is the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. So that's actually good news because that means the rest of our fears are learned. For instance, my pretty much my whole life I've had a fear of spiders. I didn't I wasn't born with the fear of spiders. I had, whether it be my mom or my aunt or whoever maybe was babysitting me when I was growing up or something like this. I don't know where it came from, but it actually came from someone else's paradigm. Someone else had a fear of spiders, and I learned that fear. I learned that fear of spiders, that spiders are bad and they're ugly and they'll bite me and they'll kill me. And then there's an underlying fear when we start to peel that onion back, right? So there are four fundamental elements of fear that I'm going to talk about today, but I want to talk about it in relation to David Hawkins' map of consciousness. You can look this up. It's a beautiful, very colorful, and it goes from 0 to 1,000. The energy log, he calls it, or that's what it's labeled on most of the things that I've looked at and learned. Now, one of the reasons I'm talking about this today is because I'm going to be having Amanda Monjour come back on the podcast, and I want to dive deeper into this with her. Now, remember, we're addressing today this topic because we want to tap into the subconscious. Now, our subconscious doesn't speak English, but our subconscious is what is holding all of the software that is being pushed to the consciousness, and then that our subconscious, so any beliefs that we're holding, any fears that we have, they're back here in the subconscious and they're playing out whether we are aware of them or not. So this is why energy work and emotion code, belief code, and body code by Dr. Bradley Nelson is, in my opinion, like very critical and something that I am actually doing on myself. I am not a practitioner of this, but Amanda is. And I really, really love the sessions I have done and the things that I have been able to release and tap into. And these are kind of like, when we let's say we're working with a therapist, because it's not to replace like, traditional therapy. Let's say we're working with a therapist and the therapist is listening to us for a few weeks or maybe even in one session, and they are hearing us respond to our life stories, right? Or whatever we're sharing. And then they ask us to listen to what we just said, or they bring an awareness to something we just said. And that actually uncovers what I call the golden nuggets. And those golden nuggets are our belief systems. We want to know what our software is. We want to uncover that. And that's what emotion code does. It uncovers that software that's programming us. And, we're behaving in our everyday life based on this software, whether we like it or not. It's just what's happening. And it's to no fault of our own. It is like everybody has it. And we all have a different program or paradigm, if you will. But I want to talk about fear in relation to the map of consciousness because it holds a certain energy. So the energy that fear is at is 100. And I'm going to talk about the lower ones. And then I'm also going to talk about a little bit about manifestation. So the 3D into the 4D and where that takes place on the map of consciousness. I think it's very interesting. Okay, so the four fundamental elements regarding fears. So the first one is that fear lives in the future, not in the present. And we know that anxiety, for instance, is that's a fear-based feeling. Now, it's very important for us to label our feelings when we're having them, because the subconscious talks and it communicates in feeling, and it communicates in frequency and in energy. So if I know that I'm feeling anxious, I know I'm vibrating low, and I know that I want to bring myself up. And anxiety is really driven by our fears. And a lot of times when we really process a fear or something, that we're scared of, peel back the onion around that fear. Keep asking your questions. like, for the spider example. So why am I afraid of spiders? Well, I learned that they might bite me. Well, why am I afraid that they might bite me? Well, that might hurt. Well, the underlying, thing there is that's going to hurt me and possibly kill me. So a lot of times when we peel back the onion on fears or judgments too, also, it comes down to the fear of dying, the fear of death. When we really like keep asking yourself why, keep asking yourself, peel back the onion, continue to ask a question after you get every single answer, and find out where that lands for you. Is it because you have a fear of death? Is it because you have a fear of whatever? Not to say that is good or bad, but we want to be vibrating at a higher level than that. So just so you have a context here, for the map of consciousness. So shame is vibrating at a 20 on the energy log. Guilt is 30. So remember, shame is us having this internal belief that I am a bad person. Like we internalize that. And then guilt is I'm not a bad person, but I might have did a bad thing. So moving from shame to guilt is actually a good thing because it's you're moving up the map of consciousness. The next one is apathy. So that's vibration at a 50. And from there, 75 is grief. And then we have fear at 100. Now, the next fundamental element regarding fear is just an emotion or a feeling, and it has no power outside of which we assign it. So our brain is giving our fears a context. Like, what is the context that the brain has around something that's happening? We're labeling it our circumstances that happen in life. We are labeling them. Well, that does not do us a service because a lot of times, like, let's say, let me think here. I'm going to use, just for the sake of me using this example in the past, I'm going to use my dad dying as an example. So when my dad died, what did I labeled that circumstance as bad because I had a beautiful relationship with my father. I love my dad. I love you, Dad. And I know he's watching me. I loved him dearly. I was so sad for the loss of him and the loss that our family went through. Now, I'm labeling that circumstance that happened in my life as bad. Well, the universe works in such complex ways that we cannot assign any circumstance good or bad. And that is not an original thought. That is Alan Watts. So if you go on YouTube, I encourage you to Google The Chinese Farmer. It is a little parable, and he explains that through this story of the Chinese farmer that we can't label anything that happens to us as good or bad. And that is what we are doing when we're living in circumstance. Did we just label something as good? Let's say you wake up one morning and you have like $10,000 in your bank account and you don't know where it came from. You're probably going to label that as good, but you actually don't know if that's good. You really don't. It looks good on the surface because our brain has, in our life experience has given it context, right, around whether that is good or bad. So again, fear is just an emotion or a feeling. So we are able to move from that vibration. We don't have to live there. But many of us in addiction recovery, I believe, do. Like I know I lived in fear for a long time around all sorts of different things, not just there's actually 6 really common fears with addiction recovery, but I'm not going to go into that today. It's a different topic. But any which way, we tend to vibrate pretty low, especially in the early recovery stages. But also, if we continue to live in circumstance, if we continue to go through our recovery and labeling everything as good or bad, we're like constantly being pushed from the one extreme to the other when we're living our life this way. So if we can just be neutral and just trust in the universe, trust in our higher power, trust that the plan is laid out. Like this is where manifestation comes in, really. And so the 3D is our reality and what is happening in front of us. And the 4D is what we want to manifest. What do we want to create? Well, if we want to create, let's say, financial freedom, or you want to create the body of your dreams, or you want to create the best relationships that you've ever had. You want happiness and contentment and your time and time with your family. You want all these beautiful things that life offers, right? You want to manifest those things. I'm sorry to say, but you are not going to manifest those things if you are not vibrating at the level that those things live. They live at a higher vibration. So if we are constantly in grief, fear, need is not good. So desire, need, that is going to be a lower frequency. So the next level is desire. So the third fundamental element regarding fears is that it's always about loss. So this has to do with our attachments, right? And it's no coincidence that right above fear on the consciousness map is desire. That's a energy log of 125. So that's where we're at now when we're talking about this fundamental element. Number 3, fear is always about loss. So, if we get attached to things, that is going to, it's not going to serve us. It's not going to serve us because the fear of losing a source of something that you are attached to is directionally proportionate to the intensity of the attachment that we have to it. So we have to remember that our value and validation as a person should never be dependent on something external or outside of ourselves or circumstance. Again, going back to the circumstance, this is why we don't want to label our circumstances as good or bad. They're neutral. We want to take that opportunity to trust the process, to be honest, open, and willing. That's something that's higher up on the consciousness map of consciousness. Now, lost my train of thought here. Oh, so moving up the scale of consciousness. So the fourth element of fear is present only when there is desire. So again, that desire is at 125. And we build up expectations about our life. And again, we label our circumstances, and we can come up with a concrete picture of how our lives should be versus how they actually might be. So everything, and this is universal law. So if you don't believe this or you're skeptical, I'm talking about like universal law. So universal law of thinking, what we are thinking is created in our 3D world. So our world around us right now, your world that whether you like it or not, you have created that. You have created that world. And when we have our circumstances plus our perspective, so of what we've created, right, equals our experience. So when we talk about manifesting, if we want to manifest all those things I was talking about, our beautiful, perfect life, whatever that looks like for you. Well, I shouldn't use the word perfect, but you know what I'm talking about. So what you want, what would you love? Asking yourself, what would you love? We want to tap in to the feelings of what it would be like if we were that person living in that life that we dream about. So how would you be acting if you had all of the relationships were beautiful in your life, that you were financially free? What would that give you? That would give you time with your family, time with your friends, time for yourself. That would give you freedom to a certain extent, right? So what does that look like? What are you feeling? What are the things that you're doing? Are you experiencing that? We have to tap into it. And we can tap into it even if we don't have the money or whatever it is to actually see it in our 3D world, because it's in the 4D. It's not quite a reality yet, but we're creating it. We're using our imagination to create it. Our imagination is our biggest coping skill. And so it's an amazing tool, but we need to tap into that same vibration. We can't be vibrating at here around fear. So if fear is here at 100, we can't be vibrating this life that we want when we are at that vibration. So we want to move up. So this is what I want to end on. So when we vibrate at a 200, 200 is courage. So that is where the hope comes in here, people. So all of us stepped into recovery, whatever you're in a recovery from, we stepped into recovery in a place of courage. It took courage to step in to that. So we want to be vibrating there or higher. We don't want to be living it. So when we are having these feelings that will come in and out, because it's not like we're never going to experience fear or shame or guilt or grief, we're going to go in, we're going to ebb and flow, because that's the law of rhythm, right? So we're going to ebb and flow, but how can we move ourselves to a different frequency? What are the things that we can do to get us to that end result? So for me, I have journaled about my end result self and what I see myself as, that freedom that I'm actually experiencing now, which is why I'm teaching this to you guys, because I want you to be able to be in the same place I am in your long-term recovery. I want you to be thriving. And when we have this knowledge and we know this stuff, little by little, every single day, we can practice. So if you find yourself vibrating lower on the map of consciousness, and you are down in those lower vibration frequencies, what can you do to get yourself up and out of that? Is it listening to some music? Is it talking to one of those family members that you want to be spending more time with? Is it just giving them a phone call? I don't think we call people enough these days. We're always texting or feeling like we communicated with them because maybe we saw all their stuff they posted on social media or something like this. We have this perception that we were around people, that we were connected, but were we really connected? So that might also be a way that you can raise out of your vibration. But having a concrete and clear end result, or what you're dreaming about, what you want to have, is going to eventually manifest, because that is the law of perpetual transmutational energy, aka the law of thinking, whatever you want to call it. That's what that is. And whether you like to believe that or not, it is just universal law, just like the law of gravity. It's just, whether you believe it in or not, it's truth. So that is how I want to tie in this fear, because I feel like a lot of times that's where we're vibrating. We're vibrating a little bit lower, and sometimes even lower than that. And how can we get ourselves out of that? But fear, I love the acronym for fear as false evidence appearing real, because it is really what we're labeling it as, right? It is really that element number 2, it's just the power that we're assigning it. So how much power are we assigning fear? How much are we then carrying out behavior patterns because they might be attached to those belief systems that are in our subconscious? So I hope that this wasn't confusing and that you got a little bit of clarity around the elements of fear and about the map of consciousness, because I want to be talking about this more. And as I bring it up on the podcast, I want you to have at least some kind of a baseline of where this is coming from. So again, that the psychiatrist who invented this or researched this, right? His name is David Hawkins. So you can look that up. And yeah, I'm going to be having Amanda back on to chat about this, and about how we can use emotion code, body code, belief code as a tool to start to really tap in to our subconscious, so we can start sussing some of this stuff out that isn't serving us. That's really the goal, because these old belief patterns, this old paradigm is not serving us, and it will keep us from doing the manifestation work that we want to do. And when we're in long-term recovery, we are also experiencing the promises, right? So I'm just going to touch on this really quick. So in traditional, like, anonymous groups, right? We talk about the 12 promises. So you can look that up in the AA Big Book if you want to know more about it. But basically, it is to say that we start seeing good things happening when we stop using. Well, think about it. Think about what our active addiction does to us when we're using. We're vibrating really low. We are in a constant shame, guilt spiral, whatever you want to call that. We are living in fear, especially, with the layers of paranoia and all these things that the whatever drug we're using is creating, like this. We're living in the 3D world, the reality, but we're making decisions and behaviors off of that. So think about everything I said in this podcast now, and put that through the lens, right, of active use for a second. So that it's no wonder why we start seeing the promises happen when we get sober. And when we stop using these substances, when we stop putting these things into our body. And I'm not even talking about it at a like bioaccumulation and mitochondrial, damage right now. I'm not even talking about that level, just talking about the vibrational level. So that, which is also quantum. So that frequency that we're vibrating at when we're in active use, and then you take away the active use, and now we have our more clarity, right? Because we're sober now, and it's no wonder we start seeing the promises. Even people who don't work a program will see the promises. Some promises happen, and it's because naturally it takes courage. You need to be at a certain vibrational plane to actually stop, because there's a fear around what's going to happen if I go into recovery. And we'll talk about those stages on a different podcast, but like those common fears that we believe in our recovery. But yeah, so lots to think about. I'll end on that note, and yeah, I'll see you all next time. Drink water. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found value in this information. And if you did, please share it. Another way to support the podcast is to leave a 5-star review. If you want to connect, you can message me on Instagram or email me at andiaray@outlook.com. And remember, drink water.